Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host Orvice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass. We have an absolute pleasure of hosting two guests of us today. One guest that you might remember from another podcast before in another season, and a new guest that is very familiar to us, but not familiar to you. Do you guys want to introduce yourself?
So I am Daniel Bess. I do product marketing at Permit.io. Been doing it for, 3 years now, or?
2 years and a bit.
Yeah. So I do everything from writing technical content to designing esoteric conference booths. So glad to be here.
It's nice to have you, Daniel. And Amir?
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me back. For the folks that don't already know me, I'm an early stage investor backing developer-focused companies, people building infrastructure, and even folks focusing on cybersecurity these days. It's an interesting time to do this line of work, but before this, I was a long-time engineer, kind of building the same stuff I get to have the privilege of investing in today. And I do that alongside my partner, a gentleman named Walter Korchak at Fire Streak Ventures. That's me.
Awesome. Well, it's awesome to have you back, and it's awesome that you brought another fact with you for this episode. But to kick us off, without any particular order, I've got the first fact here, and supposedly it's by you, so why don't you take it away?
Thank you. So my fact for this episode is actually a product of research that I did. And the fact is that most developers choose their databases according to familiarity instead of what the actual requirements that they have or the application or database that they're building. And I got to this research basically looking through the internet, Google, and a lot of Reddit, looking at how people suggest that our engineers choose their database. And while you have a lot of guides saying, you should look at scalability, you should look at the data formats, you should look at a lot of other stuff, in the end of the day, when you read what people say on how they choose, you find comments like, I consider my experience with databases and make a choice. And you see a lot of people also being affected by recommendations that they got from their friends and from other trusted sources that they have. One developer that wrote an entire blog on why you should actually use SQLite added this funny little story. I started learning programming with Django, and the doc straight up said SQLite isn't suitable for production. I had the wrong impression for a long time. Then I started using it for my own use cases and realized the trade-offs. So it seems that databases, which are obviously a core part of almost any application you'd build, are, while a key element of technology, we're making our choices about them more based on social constructs as opposed to, data persistence constructs. And I wonder, what do you folks think of that?
I actually relate to this very closely because I remember a time when I was doing my internship in the US for Cisco. And in the evenings, we used to meet up with friends and do some coding. And we were working on a project, and I was a MongoDB guy at that point. And to some extent, I was fairly familiar and comfortable with using it. And then I had friends come up to me telling me all about like Redis. And I had no idea about it. But I felt that I was almost kind of forced into using it. And at the beginning, when I had to go through that learning curve, I had absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And it just really kind of made me think that, it made me in some way regret that I didn't stick to something that I was familiar with. So I kind of understand that aspect. But on the other hand, I think it is really important to consider what kind of database you are using, especially if you have a very specific need. And I don't think that should be bypassed by just your familiarity and comfort into using a piece of technology.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Django and SQLite. I used to be a huge Django guy. that was like one of the key frameworks that really got me to build, I would say, probably like enterprise class software. And I was super excited because I was coming from electrical engineering world, and I was trying to be like, okay, which language do I double down on? And then it was, of course, Python, and thankfully it has use cases beyond that today. But I remember that exact point in the docs where it's like, yeah, SQLite, it's nice because it comes with Python kind of, and comes with both like Unix style setups. And it's great for learning effectively the framework, but they really did deter you from using it in a production way. And maybe they were right, during that time. But I'm glad you brought this up, because I was actually just having this conversation with another colleague that I think that SQLite is like now going through a renaissance period, where I think there's a convergence of like, not just at the hardware level where we have faster disks, faster drives overall, better network connections. We have more like edge style networks that have been proliferated, where it just makes a lot of sense for I think a lot of projects to use something like SQLite. Now, of course, a lot of people that probably got into web development, they didn't pick SQLite as their first option because they were like, you use MySQL or Postgres, or maybe your boss forced you to do something else. Maybe you even had to use, you're one of the cool kids that were using Mongo during those times. But I think like SQLite, the fact that it's just SQL and there's really no setup process, I don't even think it, excuse me, I don't think it doesn't even suffer too much from the familiarity problem. I think it suffers more from just like people saying all this stuff about it over the years. And I think that period is gone now. At least that's my spiel.
That's also a form of familiarity. You're familiar with it as a piece of crap. That's where, so you're not going to touch it. You're going to work with something else, and that you have a different perspective of it. I can say that I definitely see this affecting me. Once I get some tool, be it a database or another, and it works well for me, I sometimes kind of lean and hope that it will work well as in other spots. I think I lean a lot on Redis in a lot of the cases. It's just kind of more as a cache than a database, but still. But this kind of makes me think, what does this mean for us as kind of a society? If we keep sticking to the things that we know instead of the things that will be most suitable, that means that there's a huge lag time until we adopt the actually relevant technologies. And this all actually connects to another fact we shared in another episode about the several episodes talking both on Rust and Go, as these are kind of taking over and becoming more commonplace and becoming a better way to write more secure programming. It seems that like these languages have been around for a while, but their adoption curve is being pretty slow. So even in the fact that we can point at it and say, oh yes, it solves problems on a technical aspect, we can say, oh, this might be a better solution, but because of our human nature, we might be delaying our own technological evolution. And I wonder if there's ways that we can address this. Is there a way that we can be more honest with ourselves as we're picking our technology? And another element here is what this means for marketing to developers. So if you go to any database company right now, you look at their website, they'll be tooting, oh, this is so much faster. This is so much more reliable. This says better memory management. But it seems that what they actually should be saying is, your friend that you know, they're using this. And, you used this in the past, you just didn't know, you can trust this, stuff like that. So familiarity, maybe that should be the key message.
Yeah, it can even go as simple as, you can do the dirty trick of this is exactly like the thing but better. That's the easiest go-to, I think.
Yeah, I think also thinking about this, there is the familiarity of something and being kind of leaned towards using it. Then there is also being familiar with a technology and saying it's absolutely crap. And then there is also the mix of both. I actually experienced this. Amir, apologies. I was never a fan of Django, and I was pushed into using it. And because it was so to me so tedious to create a nice UI in Django, I ended up, as part of my university dissertation, writing a plugin that allows me to use React inside of Django. Uh, so I was familiar with something and not liking it, to familiar with something that I'm comfortable with, and finding a way around to using both and avoiding the hassle that I don't like.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on, what year you really got deep into, web development. Because I think, when Django first came out, none of this stuff even existed. And it was,
absolutely.
Times definitely changed. But yeah, I think familiarity is like the ultimate thing here. And I like how you touched on the topic of kind of developer marketing on this stuff. Especially now that we're kind of in another renaissance period, I think, for developer tools, because everything is just so much better on so many levels, and developers, and we thought this was happening like even 5 years ago, but I think it's even worse now, where you're just getting pitched so many different things, and particularly databases are also seeing this like new shift. There's now more bespoke databases. There's now people building on top of pre-existing databases and kind of making them whole new things. Especially, you're seeing this a lot with Postgres. So I think we live in good times, but it's just super competitive. But I will say there has been a resurgence back to the familiarity around SQL, which I think is becoming the common ground. Which is, if you remember, there was like the point where it's like, oh my god, I don't even want to touch SQL because it's all NoSQL, right? Like, give me that Mongo, right? DynamoDB, all that good stuff. But I think the shift is kind of, the pendulum has swung back into the thing people have consistently been familiar with, which is just SQL. And the thing is like, these databases also got hell of a lot better too. So over even the last few years.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that the space is still evolving. Like we're seeing new types of databases emerge, like vector databases. Like conceptually, they existed for a while, but now they're very commonplace. Like with AI, it's like all the rage is, oh, how do I optimize my vector database and how I connect it to my model, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it would be interesting to see how this space evolves. So audience, listeners, stick with us. We'll keep you up to date. And I think this is a perfect point in our conversation to switch to our next fact.
It is the perfect point, and that fact belongs to you, Amir. So please take it away.
Alrighty. My fact for this episode is coming just from a thought I had the other day, which was, I know emails are sent from space. I know people on the space station send emails, but when was the first email sent from space? And that actually happened in 1991. So not too long ago, right? And the first email was sent back then from the space shuttle Atlantis during the STS-43 mission, and it was sent by two astronauts, Shannon Lucid and James Adamson, and they sent it from an Apple Macintosh portable. So this was like one of the first like modern looking laptops, from Apple. And this is what they said in that first email they sent down: "Hello Earth, greetings from the STS-43 crew. This is the first Apple link from space," and we'll talk about what, the Apple link part. "Having a great time. Wish you were here. Send cryo and RCS. Hasta la vista, baby. We'll be back." So 1991,
Of course they said that. Of course.
Yeah. So it was interesting that that this is how it went down, and they mentioned Apple Link, and for those that don't know, Apple Link was kind of Apple's web thing for the time. That had it was how you sent emails, and it was kind of their bulletin board, online bulletin board, pseudo social network, right? That's how it looked like in the earlier days. And it was just called Apple Link. And it's funny that they said, this is the first Apple link being sent from space, not the first email being sent from space. Yeah, that could just be great marketing from Apple. Who knows? I don't know.
I bet someone got paid to say that.
Oh, yeah. The first brand endorsement from space.
I was alive in 1991. I was pretty young, but it doesn't feel like a natural thing for someone to say. So
yeah. Now the thing is, they did have to modify Apple Link to work from space, and this is the interesting part, which is, they had to work with NASA's ground level communication base, had to work with like NASA's communication protocol, so they had to kind of like patch it in to make it work, and they also had to make some of the software more easy to use just in space, because a lot of things go wrong when you're communicating from outside of Earth. So there was a lot of like patchwork and reinforcement and modification that had to happen to do that. Also, one thing to note here is, since they were using this Apple Macintosh, they also had to harden the hardware, which is, I guess, related to the other interesting part about this is, why this is even important, and I think even interesting beyond just the fact that this is, that was when the first email happened, was due to the fact that it kind of brought about this notion that you can use consumer grade hardware effectively, or consumer grade technology, off the shelf stuff in spaces like space, in a spacecraft application. And this is kind of some of the philosophy behind modern space companies as well, like SpaceX, where it was all founded on like, hey, let's build things cheaper, let's build things more redundant. If you build it cheaper, we can make them more redundant. And it really introduced that concept back then. So I think that's really important. I remember, when I was like a young college student, I used to, during the summer times in Southern California, I work at SpaceX. And the whole thing there was, just do it super cheap. Just make it off the shelf. And it was kind of mind-boggling because, you were like, no, but it has to be this like military grade. It's got to be high-end, it's got to be expensive. But that was the mantra of like, no, we can do it cheaper, less expensive across the board. We can just harden these kind of off-the-shelf components, make it more redundant, and you just make it a little bit more resilient design. That's where we landed now. So that's how the world, at least in the space industry, looks like now. And it also has led to the proliferation of like a bunch of space startups too. So anyways, I thought this was like an interesting first in history.
The email itself is amazing, but I cannot let go of the thought of what was the name of that Wi-Fi network.
It wasn't Wi-Fi, but network.
Yeah, but it really does sound like a stunt piece done by Apple to really, well, like you say, to showcase the functionality and possibilities of the devices available to a normal consumer. But then again, thinking about all the things that they've done here, they really, really thought about their marketing. So the Apple Link and everything else, it was just all designed by someone to make an impression and do a lot of sales.
But potentially, yeah.
It makes me think what would have happened like in different like time periods for different things. Like, so if this email, for example, was sent in the early 2000s, would, instead of hasta la vista, baby, we'll be back, would have said, what's up? Or that. Or like if we had this trend of like plugging in marketing into historic events, like, so I don't know, like you find like this stele from Egypt, and it says, this correspondence by Pharaoh with the priest is brought to you by Coca-Cola and or something. Regarding hardening, I think that's a very interesting challenge in general. I think in the case here, since the computer was within the space shuttle, I guess, or spacecraft, just to be more direct, I guess it got most of its defense from the shuttle itself, as it's already protecting the fragile humans from space. But engineering hardware and software for space is a huge challenge. It made me think of NASA's Voyager 1 having software issues because of cosmic rays, like having one bit in the software itself flip because of radiation. How do you, like, it's really hard to debug something like that.
They were able to fix that one bit flip, or is that just permanently damaged?
I'm kind of pulling that out of memory. I'll have to do some research and maybe bring that as a fact for another episode. But yeah, there are a lot of unique challenges in setting both humans and software and hardware to space.
Yeah, look, that 1-bit flip problem you mentioned is pretty common. It even happens when you're just, a plane is flying in Earth's atmosphere. It'll still happen. And it's just a common thing. That's why, modern communications is all probabilistic. You're trying to minimize all the noise that's coming in. Digital signal processing, a whole field of study on it. Super, super interesting. You can spend your whole life in it, But that bit flipping problem happens all the time, just from normal radiation, and all sorts of things. Otherwise, like we really couldn't even communicate without like filtering through this noise.
I think it's a matter of statistics. Like obviously, it happens less often in your home office as it happens like outside of the ionosphere, which protects us from radiation to some degree. Speaking of radiation, let's radiate yourself into the next fact, and that one belongs to Philip. Philip, take it away.
So, my fact for this episode is that quite a long time ago, it was in 1991, there were some researchers at the University of Cambridge which essentially came up with a hack. They had to control a pot in a Trojan room, so they wouldn't make a trip to find the empty pot. So essentially, the idea here is that they were just brewing coffee, right? They were brewing coffee in another room, and they didn't want to travel to that room. And at that point, they actually created and set up the first ever webcam, essentially, to monitor the coffee pot. Now, in general, I think there's a lot of different kind of innovations here, and innovations happening in the world that kind of we take for granted, or things that actually happen out of a silly situation and become something incredibly important. In today's day and age, webcams are everywhere. They're essentially a fundamental piece of keeping communities secure and keeping other places secure. Now, to dive a little bit deeper into this story, essentially they had a camera that they set up, and it provided it was a 128 pixel by 128 pixel grayscale image, which was updating it was 3 times per minute, which actually was declared as the world's first ever webcam. Now, there is a lot of situations now. If we look at the latest innovations that we have in the world of technology now, there's so many of them. But I'll name one out of the hundreds that are out there. And something that we have that use webcam technology is, for example, smart fridges. Now, how do smart fridges use webcam technology? Well, essentially, they're able to be equipped with internal cameras, sensors, now even AI. And essentially what they do is they scan your fridge, they track the content of your fridge, they track the time that you put an item into the fridge, what type of item it is, and they can suggest recipes that you can use from those items. They can create shopping lists for you. They can remind you when something needs to be used by a specific date. And essentially, they just manage your, meals, your prep. And cameras like so appear in so many interesting parts of technology nowadays. So there is a lot of everyday problems that can be solved with innovative technology. It doesn't just have to be webcams. But do you guys have any examples of things that you maybe hacked that worked for you? Or things that you experienced where a piece of very simple technology was used to achieve a better outcome?
I'm just thinking about using the camera in the fridge to take images of you at 12 p.m. going in for a snack and just automatically posting them on social media to prevent you from ever doing that again.
As a deterrence from you eating the wrong snacks.
Yep.
That's the new shame diet by Samsung. Before I talk more about webcams and utilizing technology in different ways, I want to comment on something. So we had 2 facts now in sequence, both referencing back to 1991, and Amir started with saying 1991. That's not that long ago, right? And Philip, you said 1991. Oh, that's quite a while ago, right? And I think that says a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, that's just observing here, though. Regarding webcams, I think we mentioned it on another episode. There's Cloudflare's use of webcams with their lava lamps. So they have the challenge of having pure random seed generation for their encryption. So the way they solved it for it actually being random, they needed something from the physical world, assuming we're not in a simulation. The physical world, something that is purely random. So they took lava lamps. If you go into their office, there's a wall full of lava lamps and their webcams tracking those lava lamps, and they use the random patterns in the lava lamps to generate random seeds for their encryption. So I guess that's another case where very basic technology, lava lamps, in combination with your another basic set of technology, webcams, also comes into play here into something a little more grandiose, which is pure randomness for encryption.
Yeah. I remember seeing that Cloudflare lava lamp wall. I was like, that's such a cool way to randomize stuff, right? It's actually being used for something. It's not just like a funky display of art or something edgy like that. If folks are listening in and they haven't heard of the Cloudflare lava lamp, I suggest you just Google it, or I should say Perplexity it these days. And not playing on my own book here, but it's a better way to do it. And learn more about just how they're using this wall of lava lamps to just create like a better random generator, which they can use for all their encryption needs.
I wonder if there's easier ways to do like more things that are random that are just in your day-to-day surroundings that you can use, like I don't know, like a gust of wind. Or I think like maybe the challenge that we're trying to solve is have it random, but have it very controlled, like within certain constraints that you can tweak there.
You can use a webcam in your house to track how many times you go up to your fridge. That could be quite random.
That's very deterministic. That's not random at all. I think you're going to see the habitual repetitivity.
That also gets into a very deep question. Is there free will? Can you create a machine that will calculate all of the patterns in your brain that decides when you go where? Because if you can do that, then you can reproduce the random seed, and then it's not actually random. I think the solving philosophy is a second level challenge that you address this when you just want something reliable with randomness.
Yeah, it's a classic problem doing this random generation stuff because there's a lot of security concerns about it. Slot machines seem to have figured it out. The people that build slot machines being random is technically an important problem. And people are always trying to figure out, when they say random, what is truly random most of the time,
right?
So you can crack the code. But yeah, I mean, I think people have used some like nuclear stuff to generate some random numbers. But yeah, it's another whole nother world.
Working with nuclear energy, I think, is has more maintenance than a lava lamp. But maybe like a soda pop or something, like how the bubbles in your drink stir, or how like you put a tea bag into some warm water and how the solution kind of changes. I think that that's also an easy way to produce some randomness.
But wouldn't when we say random, wouldn't a random generator be truly random if it wasn't influenced by outside like environmental factors? For example, with the soda, maybe if it was colder or warmer, it might produce a different amount of bubbles. But truly,
true for the lava lamp as well. I'm sure if you're
so shouldn't we, when we say random, shouldn't it be something that is truly random, not influenced by anything else? And what is that even?
I think you want the random aspect of the data to be the dominant aspect of it, so it overshadows the other elements in the picture. I think that's the way to go about it, because you can't completely control it. I think also like with the Cloudflare lava lamp wall, they actually leverage the fact that it's in their office, so people go by that wall, and that's like they say it adds more randomness as less vote. Well, I guess if like a group of people just decides to stand there and move in a particular way that could actually uh, impede the solution. I don't know. That sounds pretty
Yeah,
random.
maybe it's like, I actually don't know what's exactly in the lava lamp. Like, I don't think anything's magnetic there, right? But let's say if there was something a little bit magnetic, or just people's heat walking by it is impacting it. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, I think another way would be just like, the magnetic like fluctuations of people impacting something. So if there's more of like a magnetic field, because it's like the Hall effect, that call in physics. Yeah, that could maybe be a source of it.
So also maybe the magnetic personality of some people.
Yeah. So when I walk by it, it goes the other directions for sure.
You'd be confined to your home just to make sure that our software continues to run as we need it. And I think this is our perfect spot to move to our fourth and last fact for this episode. And this one belongs to Daniel.
All right. So my fact for today is it's going to be vague and controversial, as podcasts should be. The In short, in short, I'm going to say that when users criticize the application that you're building, they actually might know what they're talking about, and I'll elaborate on that. So this little story is based on a 2019 interview by Ed Stern from Splash Damage, the company behind Wolfenstein: Enemy Territory. So this story happens all the way back in 2003, or was probably a senior developer by then.
Well,
Talking about year differences. So back in 2003, they were developing Wolfenstein, like I said, and they started beta testing their multiplayer servers. The game is a first-person shooter with two teams trying to beat each other. If you're not familiar with it, the teams are Allies and the Axis. Now, the Allies and the Axis each had their own gun models. And one of the most common complaints that they've received after the beta test is that the Allied guns are significantly stronger and better than the Axis guns. Now, they took this commentary and went back to the developers, and they showed them the complaints. So the developers went to the code and compared the two guns, and they were absolutely exactly the same. The clip size was the same, the rate of fire was the same, the damage they did was the same. There was no technical difference between them. Now, they looked at this and they were like, okay, the users are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. But then they went to the server statistics and they saw that even though the guns are technically identical, there is a significant bias towards people managing to get more kills with using the allied weapons. Um, and they were like, okay, so what is happening here? There's clearly something that's going wrong here. So they went to the differences again to look at the differences between the two guns. Now, the guns had two differences. One was the visual model, which shouldn't have an impact on the way that the game is played. And the second one was the sound of the gun. Now, the sound of the Allied gun had more bass to it. It made people feel like it has more impact, that it is stronger. And that made people more confident when they got their hands on one, which means they played more recklessly, which means they got more kills and they got better at the game. So the actual result here was they realized that the players were right all along, and that the bias came from this angle that they completely didn't regard. Once they changed the sound to have a little less bass, it solved the problem completely. It balanced out the guns, and order was restored. So I think it's a really interesting story about like user experience and how user experience translates into commentary to developers and about this developer user tension, that when we build an application and we expect our users to use it in some way, and then they fail to use it in the way that we expect them to, and we easily blame the users because we did everything right. It's an interesting angle to think about of where this can come from.
It makes me think of like a developer debugging this. Essentially, this is something called PEBCAC. Problem exists between chair and screen. Keyboard and chair. Like your code is fine, but the way it's being utilized by the human aspect, the psychology here can be produce dramatic results. And it's also kind of similar to what I shared with my fact here. In the end of the day, it's the human biases really changing the way our technology works, even if the technology itself, from a pure perspective, is fine. I do wonder if we can leverage this to do like great things, like if we know that that something like changing the sound can really impact someone's performance. Maybe we should use this intentionally into products, like when you want different users in your product to have more or less engagement. Maybe this is something that we should utilize.
Yeah, there is two examples of this in the real world. The first one is that if you want a user to use your system more often, they started implementing streaks whenever you log in. And suddenly, just because of the intention of there being a streak and you being able to keep that streak up, people are more willing to actually log in the next day and do something. The other one, which is even more popular, is any kind of e-commerce website and the checkout process that they have. Now, in general, we don't see this or maybe even realize this usually, but when we buy something online, but the longer the checkout process is, the less likely we're actually able to purchase something. We just sometimes the checkout might fail in between because the form is too long, or you just like there is enough time for you to change your mind. So this is something that Amazon actually did, and they, once you complete the checkout or you enter your details, they have the one-click option. You just click once and it just orders something for you, and it's just simplifying that that kind of experience for the user, and actually proceeding with achieving something and not giving them time to think or realize, right?
Look, I think with gaming, I think it's a little bit of a special situation, right? Because there's more of a qualitative aspect to it, more of like a free form type thing, versus like classical, like normal SaaS software, let's say, right? Where you kind of know the clear, inputs and outputs. But yeah, gaming is just, especially in these larger games where you can kind of just walk around and do all sorts of things. You only really get to suss out the details at great depth if you're just like literally probably just like watching someone play it over time. You're like, oh, okay, this is what people are actually reacting to. And what's funny is like in normal software development world, just classic, online products, we spend a lot of time on testing, observability, doing all this instrumentation to figure out like what people are doing within the product. But I think in gaming, they have a little bit of that, but they still have like this tough challenge of like, how do you test this stuff really? You need physical people playing games, and there's a whole bunch of people that do that. Which is, by the way, like a fun job. I think I knew some guy that used to test like Halo games for Microsoft for the, but yeah, I think it's like it's an area, honestly, we've seen where some people are now starting to focus on. There's this company called LiveAware Labs, and the founders, there's some of the guys who used to work on the Lara Croft games, the Tomb Raider games, and then also Halo, and they saw this like firsthand in their like game dev life, where it's like, we just got to like watch these people play and then really get the high fidelity feedback. They have this really cool product where it's like it kind of integrates with a lot of these game testers, and they just live stream their game into like this testing platform effectively, and they can get all this high fidelity feedback from gamers. And then it's the test cases you can never write, and you're seeing that firsthand, and they're giving you pretty raw feedback. But yeah, it's gaming is such a different like development process.
I mean, I guess it is, but there's also the aspect of community. I see like people in permits community talking about them using the product, showing, sending in screenshots and showing us how they use the product. And I see this in gaming communities all the time, where you see, people gather around a game and they experience it and they see things and they dig into it. And from their conversations, from the trouble that they're experiencing, from what they find fun, what they find frustrating, it's a very good way to debug, to add new features, to realize what they want. And that's not that similar from other types of software development.
No, it's like a similar but different, and I think it's all a little bit of a craftsman type effort. So I like companies that kind of, you can kind of feel that people cared, and they put a lot of like artisanal touch to the product, whether it's from the website all the way down to like the last mile, even CLI, let's say, right? But yeah, I wish more companies cared now. That's why I like startups a little bit more. They're still in that like craftsman mode, but once you start, becoming like big old companies, you kind of lose a little bit of that sense, and the challenges are different.
I think it also gives us a little insight into the interaction between vendors and users. It's actually these little things, these little interactions that might create frustration for the customers that teach the companies the most. I know that for us, Permit, I learned the most about how people use the product when they come in to describe the things that aren't working for them, the bugs that they run into, or the missing features. While I obviously learned about the problem they're facing, I also learned a lot about how they're seeing the product as a whole and how are they using other features. And without those bugs or small things that were missing, they wouldn't even come in to describe what they're experiencing. So there's something about these small cracks in what we're building that actually bring us together. And I find that it's a very positive message in all of the negativity around the bugs and UX problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think you guys at Permit do a good job with your overall branding and like making it welcoming. I think people just generally want to get, just touch it, like engage with it in a little bit. A question for you all, since this is your day to day. I mean, how much do you think that's kind of impacted you being able to garner attention from developers?
Terrific question. I'll give my 2 cents and I'll let Daniel and Philip maybe give a more substantial answer. I'd say it has 2 aspects to it. One is how approachable we are, and I think that's the most impact. I think it's one thing if you have technology out there and you have the option of talking to you, and how does it feel to talk to you? Are you someone that I'd like to converse with as a colleague or as an individual? And branding and how you sound and how you engage the conversations when they start, I think that's dramatic in the percentage of conversations that you'll actually get. So it's in the nuances. So I'd say it's very important. The other part is how many people do you get in general to interact with you? And I do think that having an appealing brand and having a kind of openness vibe is useful for that, but it's really hard to measure because I can't really A/B test this. Like I won't switch our entire brand into something else to see if it affects that metric. But I definitely think it's important.
I could say that I come from a history and art history academic background, and when I just started working at Permit, I would write a lot of the messaging, and or would look at it and be like, "What the hell are you doing? Like nobody talks like this. Stop it! You don't talk like this." And it took me about 6 months at least to hear him saying, talk to people like you talk to people, like you would explain the product like you would to a friend at a bar. I always use this example, like, or I'm quoting you here. Explain the product like you're explaining it to casually to a friend at a bar. And it took me a really long time to get to this point where I can talk like this in a work setting. But once I did, you could really, really see how much of a change it did in the community, in the messaging of the social media, even at pitches, in the booth, in sales meetings. It changes the whole perspective of people towards you and towards your product, and especially towards your community. When you're building a community around software, of you people using this software, and whether they're getting support or they want to know how to build something better, when you talk to them like a person, it completely changes their perspective of and their experience of the product they're engaging with. And one of the coolest things I think here is how significantly it lowers their frustration when engaging with it. You have this situation, I've personally experienced this, of like, you go into Amazon because your package was late, and you talk to a person, and they give these like pre-written robotic answers, and it's even more frustrating because, like, I'm a person, talk to me, like, I'm frustrated, please talk to me like a human being. And they're like, no, your package will be arriving at blah blah blah. It drives you crazy. So being like, oh shit, that's wrong, that's bad, we're gonna fix it, we're really sorry, and being genuine about it and being open, completely changes the experience of users inside products.
Yeah, I'm actually really proud of what we were able to achieve at Permit, because from the experience I have being a developer advocate and also teaching somewhat difficult concepts on my YouTube channel and trying to explain things to people that might not have the right understanding to maybe get it the first time. I think what we've managed to achieve is kind of this transparency that we have as a company of kind of the things that we do and are open about how we approach the technology. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of our branding that we have created is extremely, like Or said, approachable to others. But I think more importantly is that people realize, and they come up to the booth or when they speak to us with this kind of feeling that they have to speak to us as people who are extremely corporate or maybe very official, like, because we're an authorization company. It's a difficult concept for people to understand in the first place, and people just generally have this approach the first time they meet us, that okay, we're going to keep it very strict because you're a backend company and you do really important things, so we need to keep it very important. But really what they realize is that ultimately they're just talking to fellow engineers that are just involved in something very deeply and passionate about something that really is important in the world of tech. And once they actually realize that, they end up really kind of being more convinced into the importance of using this type of tech. They're much more convinced into trusting us to do what we're presenting to them, and just the general flow of the conversation and the engagement really, really changes. And I think that in general has a really big impact, because as we all know, selling something to developers is impossible. As soon as you try to sell something to a developer, they'll literally show you a middle finger. And even though they think whatever you're selling to them makes sense, they'll still resist. So really finding that approach is extremely important, and showing them that really, if we care, maybe you should care too, and they do.
Awesome.
It's awesome.
I think that's a terrific point to wrap up this episode.
It is, and as always, it was an extreme pleasure to have you, Amir. It was awesome to have you, Daniel, on the podcast, to be able to share some facts with the audience as well. So to all the audience, we really hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, we will see you in the next episode.
I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it.